The black sedan honked at me before I had even come to a full stop. I had spent the last hour of the drive rehearsing nothing, which is a discipline of its own. There is a temptation, on the last road toward a place you're about to be responsible for, to fill the quiet with speeches, to try out the words you will say from the podium, to imagine the faces and the flags and the first 100 decisions. I have learned not to do that. The speeches are cheap, and they are never the ones you end up giving. I had driven the last 20 miles with the radio off and the window cracked, letting the smell of the coast come in, letting the day empty out of me, so that whatever I met at the gate I would meet as myself and not as some rehearsed version of a commanding officer trying to look like the posters. I had crossed most of a continent that day. I wanted more than anything, a shower and 8 hours and a quiet look at the place before it knew I was there. It was the kind of honk that expects a result. 2 quick taps, then a long one, the horn of a man who has never once waited at a gate in his life and does not intend to start now. I was in the visitor lane at the main gate of the naval installation, in a rented compact car that still smelled of the airport, wearing a gray travel sweater and jeans, and the particular exhaustion of a woman who has crossed 3 time zones in one day. I had my window down. The evening was warm and salt-heavy, the light going long and gold over the guard shack and the flags and the neat white line of the perimeter fence. The sedan pulled up hard on my left, nose past mine, the way a car does when the person inside believes the lane belongs to him. The rear window came down. A man leaned toward me across the leather. He was in his early 70s, silver-haired, tanned in the way of men who golf on other people's money, wearing a blazer with a small enamel pin on the lapel that I could not read from where I sat and did not need to. "Run along, honey," he said. "You're blocking real officers." Behind him, in the front passenger seat, a younger man in a suit gave a short laugh. The obligatory laugh of a man who is paid to laugh. The driver stared straight ahead. I did not answer. I have learned over 22 years that the people who most need to be right will tell you exactly who they are if you give them enough quiet to do it in. So I gave him the quiet. I put the rental in park and reached into the bag on the passenger seat, and I felt, under my hand, the flat, stiff edge of a folded set of orders I had read so many times on the plane that I could have recited them. I did not take those out. I took out my identification card instead, the plain common access card every one of us carries, and I held it out the window to the young sailor standing his post at the gate. He was a master-at-arms, second class, 23 years old if he was a day, with a fresh haircut and a duty belt worn exactly to regulation, and the alert, slightly anxious posture of a man who has been told 100 times that the gate is the face of the base. His name tape read, Marsh. He took my card with a polite, "Evening, ma'am," and turned to his scanner. The man in the sedan was still talking. "Some people," he said, to no one, to the evening, to the general unfairness of a world that made him wait 10 seconds. "Some people just wander onto a federal installation like it's a shopping mall." I looked at him then, briefly, the way you glance at weather. He had the face of a man who had been comfortable for a very long time, the softened, confident face of someone who has not been told no in a way that stuck since sometime in the previous century. The little enamel pin on his lapel caught the low sun. 2 stars. I had served under men who wore those stars and earned every gram of them, men who could quiet a flag bridge by walking onto it. And I had served near a few who wore them the way this man did, as jewelry, as a permanent excuse. I did not yet know which kind he was. I only knew that he had decided, in the space of a heartbeat, that a tired woman in a rental car was an obstacle rather than a person, and that this decision had cost him nothing his whole life, and that he expected it to cost him nothing now. "Sir, if you'll just hold a moment," Marsh said to him, polite and even, and then to me, "Ma'am, I've got you." He turned back to his scanner. Marsh scanned my card. I watched his face, because the face is where it always happens first. His eyes went to the little screen, the way they had gone to 100 screens that shift. Then they stopped. Something on the screen held them. He read it once. He read it again, and I saw the small motion in his throat as he swallowed. His hand, which had been moving to hand my card back, stopped in the air between us. He looked up at me. Not at the card. At me. Then he straightened. It was not a big motion. A civilian would not have seen it. But I had spent my whole adult life in a world built out of small motions, and I watched a 23-year-old petty officer come to the edge of attention at a visitor gate at 1800 hours on a Tuesday. And I knew that the quiet part of the evening was over. Marsh reached for the phone in the guard shack. The man in the sedan grinned at all of it, delighted, because he had decided long ago that any commotion at a gate was commotion on his behalf. "Problem, sailor?" he called out. "Need a hand?" Marsh did not look at him. He looked at me, and he held my card like it had become heavier, and he said into the phone, "Chief, you need to come out here." I could have driven onto that base the easy way. There is always an easy way when you are the one arriving. A phone call ahead, a staff car and a driver, a quarterdeck lined up and a side boy or two, and somebody with a clipboard making sure the new commanding officer's first minute on the installation is smooth as glass and empty as a stage. That is how it is usually done, and there is nothing wrong with it. Ceremony has a purpose. People need to see the handoff happen. They need to know the flag moved from one shoulder to another in the daylight, in front of witnesses, with the right words said in the right order. But that was tomorrow. I had come a day early, and I had come alone, and I had come the way I have always preferred to arrive at a place I am about to be responsible for. Quietly, unannounced, in a rental car, in civilian clothes when nobody knew to perform. I wanted to see the gate the way it actually ran on an ordinary evening, when there was no Admiral inbound that anyone had been told about, no inspection, no new boss to impress. I wanted to see whether the young sailor on post checked the card of a tired woman in a gray sweater the same way he would check the card of a staff car with stars on the bumper. I wanted to know, before I put my name over the door, what the standard looked like when no one was watching it. That is the whole of command, in my experience. Not the flag, not the ceremony. Command is every ordinary night before the ceremony, when nobody's watching and the standard still has to hold, because the standard is not a thing you switch on for visitors. It is either the way the place breathes or it is theater. I had commanded a ship. I knew the difference the way you know it in your stomach at 2 a.m, when the watch either has it or does not, and there is no audience to fool. There is a thing that happens to a place when it knows the boss is coming. Everyone stands a little too straight. The right people are on watch. The logs are perfect, and the brass is polished, and the answers are ready before you have asked the questions. And none of it tells you anything true, because you are not seeing the base. You are seeing the base's Sunday face. I did not want the Sunday face. I had inherited commands before that ran beautifully in front of an inspection and came apart the moment the inspectors drove off. And I had learned that the only way to know what you are actually taking responsibility for is to see it on a Tuesday unannounced when the watch believes the most important person at the gate is a retired man in a sedan and behaves accordingly. The way they treat the sedan when they think no one important is watching is the truth. Everything else is performance. So I had turned down the staff car. I had told my prospective staff over the phone that I would arrive on the day of the ceremony and not a minute before, which was a small and deliberate lie, the only one I intended to tell them, so that I could see the place before it composed itself for me. So I had flown in a day early, and I had rented the smallest car on the lot, and I had driven to the gate of the installation I was about to command, and I had let a retired man in a sedan call me honey, because none of that was the point. The point was the sailor with the scanner. The point was whether the gate held. I am, I should tell you, an easy person to look past. I am not tall. I do not fill a doorway. In civilian clothes, tired, at the end of a travel day, I look like exactly what Prentice took me for. A woman of a certain age going somewhere ordinary. And for most of my career, the world has treated me accordingly, and I stopped resenting it a long time ago. Resentment is a fire that only burns the person holding it. What I did instead was learn to read the treatment as information. A man who is careful and correct with a person he thinks is no one is showing you his true face. A man who is contemptuous of a person he thinks is no one is showing you his true face as well. And it is a more useful thing to know than almost anything he would tell you on purpose. Prentice had, in the length of 1 honk and 9 words, handed me a complete and accurate picture of himself, freely, because he believed I did not count and therefore did not need to be managed. People give you the truth for free when they think you cannot use it. I kept my eyes on Marsh, not on the man in the car. I have spent a great deal of my life being looked past, and I have made a kind of peace with it, and more than that, I have made a use of it. When people decide you are no one, they show you everything. The man in the sedan had already told me who he was in 9 words. The young petty officer at the gate was, right now, in the way he stood and the way he reached for the phone, and the way he did not once glance at the stars on the bumper of the car beside me, telling me something far more important. He was telling me the gate held. That was worth more to me, that evening, than any side boys. The last time a man decided what I was, before I had said a word, I was 27 years old and standing in the wardroom of a guided missile destroyer, and his name was Commander Gordon Petrie. It was the year 2009. I was a lieutenant then, a surface warfare officer 3 years into the fleet, and I was the kind of junior officer who did not talk much in meetings. I listened. I took notes. I checked my work twice, and I fixed problems quietly before they became anyone's emergency. And I had learned wrongly that this would be enough, that the work would speak, that in a world of professionals, the quality of a thing would announce itself. Commander Petrie ran the department. He was a loud, capable, backslapping man who mistook volume for competence in others because it was the only measure he trusted in himself. He liked officers who filled a room. He liked the ones who argued, who pushed back, who had, as he put it, a mouth on them. He did not know what to do with a quiet one, and so he decided, the way men like him decide, that quiet meant empty. I heard him say it. He did not know I could hear him, or perhaps he did not care, which amounts to the same thing. It was after a planning meeting, in the passageway outside the wardroom, and another officer had asked him, half as a joke, who he thought would screen for command someday out of our little group. "Not Calder," Petrie said. I heard the smile in it. "She's a fine watchstander. Detail work, she's your girl. But command track, she hasn't got the mouth for it. You need fire to run a ship. She's all thermostat." All thermostat. I have carried that phrase for 17 years. He meant it as a small cruelty, and it landed as one. And then, over a very long time, it turned into something else. Because that same night, going over the next day's navigation plan that the department had signed off on, the plan Petrie himself had approved in that loud, confident way, I found an error, not a small one. A waypoint entered wrong, a course that would have put us into shoal water on a turn we were scheduled to take at 0400 in the dark. I did not go find Petrie and make a scene. I did not announce it. I walked it back to the quartermaster, and the two of us reworked the plan, and I brought the corrected version to the navigator quietly, and it got fixed, and the ship turned in deep water at 0400, and nobody on the bridge ever knew how close the thermostat had come to being the only thing in the room that was actually on. There was a second lesson, years later, and it was the one that put my name into the record the scanner would one day read at a gate. By the year 2021, I was a commander, and I had my own destroyer, and I had learned that the quiet Petrie mistook for emptiness was, in the right hands, the most useful thing on a bridge. It was a winter night in a bad sea, well after midnight, and we lost steering. That is a plain sentence for a thing that is not plain at all. A steering casualty at night, in heavy weather, in company with other ships, is one of the situations the whole training pipeline exists to prepare you for, and secretly hopes you never see. The rudder stops answering the helm. The ship, 400 feet and 9,000 tons of it, becomes for a few seconds a thing the sea is steering instead of you. The bridge fills with alarms and voices and the particular electric fear of young sailors who have drilled this 100 times and are now living it for the first time. I did not raise my voice. I have thought about why, and the closest I can come is that a raised voice on a bridge in a crisis is a luxury the ship cannot afford, because it tells every frightened 20-year-old in the space that the captain is frightened too, and then you have 2 emergencies instead of 1. So I spoke the way I always spoke, low and even and slightly boring, and I gave the orders in the order they needed to come. Shift to after steering, sound the casualty. Come to the emergency bell. Get me the engineering officer of the watch on the phone. I called the ship behind us and told them plainly what we had and what we were doing about it, so that they could open the distance and not guess. And in the space of a few minutes that felt like a great many more, we had the rudder back under control from aft, and the ship came back to her course, and the sea went back to being something we crossed rather than something that crossed us. Nobody was hurt, nothing was bent. It did not make the news, because things that do not go wrong never do. But it went into the record, the plain official memory of the Navy, the way everything goes into the record, and years later, a machine at a gate would read a line of that record, and a young petty officer would come to attention over it, and a retired admiral would sit in his sedan and have no idea that the tired woman he had called honey had once talked a 9,000-ton ship back from the edge of a shoal with a voice she never raised. The thermostat, Petrie had said, all those years ago. He had meant it as the reason I would never command. It was, in fact, the reason I could. I did not need Petrie to see me. I needed the ship to be right. Those are not the same thing, and learning to tell them apart was the first real command lesson I ever had. The recognition you want and the outcome you are responsible for are two different currencies, and if you spend your life chasing the first one, you will bankrupt the second. Petrie taught me that without meaning to. It is the only thing he ever taught me, and it was worth more than he will ever know. 17 years later, at a gate 2,000 miles from that wardroom, a man in a sedan called me honey, and somewhere underneath the tiredness, I felt the old thermostat click on, steady and cool, exactly the way it was built to. Chief Yvonne Duarte came out of the gatehouse at something just short of a run. She was a chief master-at-arms, 39 years old, with the compact, economical movement of a senior enlisted woman who has stood 1,000 watches and expects to stand 1,000 more. She came around the barrier with her eyes already on Marsh, reading the situation off him the way chiefs do, and Marsh handed her the scanner and my card together and said something low that I could not hear. Duarte looked at the screen. I watched her read it. I watched the same thing happen to her that had happened to the young petty officer, except that Duarte was older and harder and had seen more, and so it happened faster and showed less. Her eyes moved once across the screen and then came up to my face, and something in her settled and squared, and she handed the card back to Marsh with a care that had not been there a moment before. "Captain Calder," she said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way you say a thing you want to be exactly correct. She came to attention, an easy, unforced attention, and she said, "We had you down for tomorrow, ma'am. Welcome aboard." The evening did a strange thing then. It got very quiet in one specific direction, which was the direction of the black sedan. I said, "At ease, Chief. I'm early. That's on me, not your watch." I meant it. A base does not owe you a red carpet for showing up a day before you told them to. Your petty officer ran my card exactly the way he should have. I'd have been disappointed if he didn't. Duarte's mouth moved, not quite a smile, the private satisfaction of a senior enlisted leader hearing her young sailor praised for doing the hard, unglamorous, correct thing. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "He's a good one." I can see that. The man in the sedan had gone still in the particular way of a person who has heard words he does not yet believe apply to him. "Captain, welcome aboard, ma'am." The words were arriving at him slowly, out of order, and I could see him assembling them and not liking the shape they made. Then he decided, as men like him always decide, that the solution to not understanding a situation was to assert himself more loudly into it. "Chief," he called out, leaning across the seat again. "Chief, let's move this along. I've got people waiting on the other side of that gate, and I am not going to sit here while you sort out a paperwork problem with a lost tourist." Duarte turned toward the sedan. I want to describe her face when she turned, because it was one of the more educational things I saw that whole evening. She turned toward the retired man with the 2-star pin on his lapel, the man who had just called her captain a lost tourist, and her face was not angry. It was worse than angry for him. It was the flat, patient, professional face of a woman who has just realized that the loud person in the car is now, formally, her problem, and that solving him will be the easiest part of her night. "Sir," she said, "I'll be right with you." His name, I would learn within the hour, was Gerald Prentice, Rear Admiral, United States Navy, retired. 2 stars, earned a long time ago, kept forever, the way some men keep a rank, the way other men keep a wedding ring after the marriage is gone, as proof that a thing once happened. He was not, anymore, an admiral of anything. He had retired years back and gone, as so many do, straight through the revolving door into the defense industry, and he was now a senior executive at a contractor that did a great deal of business on and around this installation. He had come, I would learn, to be a guest of honor at the change of command. My change of command. He was to sit in the good seats and be recognized from the podium and enjoy the particular pleasure of being an important man at an event about someone else. That was the crowd he thought he was waiting to join on the other side of that gate. He did not know yet that the someone else was me. "Do you know who I am?" he said. He said it to Duarte, but he said it at me in the way people do, aiming the words at the person they have decided is the source of their inconvenience. I am Rear Admiral Gerald Prentice. I have 2 stars and a tea time and a reservation at the flag mess, and I have been coming through this gate for 15 years, and I have never, not once, been made to sit in a lane while a petty officer plays with a computer. Now open the gate. 15 years, he said again, as though the number were an argument, as though duration were the same as right. I have donated to the Family Readiness Fund on this base. I have spoken at the Officers Club. There is a bench outside the gym with my company's name on it, and you are going to tell me my badge does not work. The younger man in the front seat, the associate, had stopped laughing some minutes ago. He was looking at his phone now with the intensity of a man who very much wanted to be somewhere else and was pretending to receive an urgent message. I would learn his name was Lasky, and that his job, roughly, was to smooth the path in front of Gerald Prentice and to be blamed when the path was not smooth. And I felt a small, unexpected sympathy for him, standing in the wreck of an evening he had not caused and could not fix. I have watched a great many powerful people meet a rule they cannot bend, and they nearly all do the same 3 things in the same order. First, they explain who they are, as if the rule were a misunderstanding that knowledge would clear up. Then they explain what they have done, the donations, the years, the bench by the gym, as if the rule were a debt that service would settle. And then, when neither of those works, they get quiet and dangerous and begin to think about who they can call. Prentice was moving through the stages exactly on schedule, and I stood at the gatehouse and watched him do it. And I felt the old thermostat hold me level, and I waited. Duarte glanced at me. It was a quick look, and I understood everything in it, because I had thrown that same look to 100 officers over the years. It was the look that asks, without asking, "How do you want this handled, ma'am?" And underneath it was the other question, the one every professional knows how to offer their new boss on the first night. Do you want this to have happened at all? Because it would have been the easiest thing in the world right then, to make it unhappen, to smile, to wave the sedan through, to let the retired admiral keep his evening and his dignity and his mistaken idea of the world, and to walk onto my new base, having made no waves on the very night before I took command of it. The easy thing and the right thing were standing in the same driveway, wearing the same tired end-of-day smile, and only I could tell them apart. I thought about the sailor. I thought about Marsh, 23 years old, who had just done the hard, correct thing, who had checked the card of a tired woman in a gray sweater exactly the way the rules said to, who had not flinched at the stars on the bumper. If I waved the sedan through now, if I made an exception for a loud man with an old rank, the lesson Marsh took away from his first encounter with his new commanding officer would be simple and corrosive. It would be that the rules are for tired women in rental cars, and the exceptions are for men who honk. I was not going to teach him that. Not on my first night. Not ever. There was a version of my whole career in that one small look Duarte gave me. I had been on her side of it more times than I could count, the professional offering the boss a quiet exit, and I had watched what bosses did with the offer, and it had told me everything about them. The weak ones took it every time. They waved the sedan through, they smoothed the moment away, and then a week later they wondered why their people had stopped bringing them the hard calls. Because a watch learns fast. A watch learns from the first exception that the boss will trade their integrity for a smooth evening. And once they have learned that, they stop trusting the boss to back them, and once they have stopped trusting that, you do not really command them anymore, you just outrank them. Those are not the same thing either. Petrie never learned the difference, and it is why his sailors worked for him and mine worked with me, and it is the second half of everything he got wrong about me in that passageway. "Chief," I said, "let's do this properly." I got out of the car. I did it slowly, without drama, a tired woman in jeans unfolding herself from a rental after a long flight, and I walked up to the gatehouse where Duarte and Marsh were standing, and I stood with them, on their side of the barrier, which is a thing I did on purpose. I wanted the geometry of it to be clear. I was not a visitor negotiating entry. I was, as of tomorrow morning, the person responsible for that gate and everyone standing it. "Chief Duarte," I said, keeping my voice level and low, a working voice, not a performing one. "I have a procedural question, and I'd like the by-the-book answer, not the convenient one. Yes, ma'am. That vehicle, the gentleman's access. Whose sponsorship carries his credential onto this installation?" Duarte did not have to look it up. She was a chief. She knew her own house. He's a contractor, ma'am, executive with one of the primes. His installation access routes through the security office here, under a blanket sponsorship from the current command for the duration of certain contracts and events. The current command, I said. The blanket that expires at turnover. Something moved behind her eyes. Yes, ma'am. Standing policy on change of command is that blanket contractor access under the outgoing command's sponsorship is suspended pending revet under the incoming commanding officer. It's in the turnover instruction. Most of the time it's a formality. The office reauthorizes the list the first week and nobody notices. But tonight, I said, the outgoing command's sponsorship is inside its last day, and the incoming commanding officer has not authorized anyone. No, ma'am, Duarte said. She has not. I looked at the sedan. Gerald Prentice was watching us through the open window, with the expression of a man who cannot hear the words, but has begun to suspect the subject. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to me, and I think it matters to the point. I was not doing this to punish him. I have been punished by men who had power over me, and I know exactly what it tastes like, and I had no appetite to serve it to anyone, even to a man who had called me honey, and a lost tourist inside of 2 minutes. If there had been a clean, honest way to wave him through that did not require me to bend a rule I was about to swear to uphold, I would have taken it, and I would have gone to bed and thought no more about him. But there was not. The rule was the rule. His access ran through a sponsorship that ended at my turnover, and I had authorized no one because I had not yet taken command, and the correct answer, the by-the-book answer, the answer I would have wanted any officer to give if the loud man in the car had been a stranger and I had been the chief, was that his badge did not clear tonight. Not because of who he was, because of what the rule said applied to everyone, including the tired woman in the gray sweater, including me. I was not going to punish him, I said to myself, and I have said it many times since, and it is still true. I was going to do my job, which for a man like that turned out to be the same thing. I handed my own card back to Marsh. Petty Officer Marsh, I said. Run him by the book, same as you'd run me. If his credential clears, wave him through with my compliments. If it doesn't, you do exactly what the instruction says to do, and you don't skip a line of it because he's loud. Understood? Marsh looked at me, and something happened in the young man's face that I will remember for a long time. He had been afraid, a little, the way you are afraid on your first real test. And now he was not, because the person who was supposed to have his back had just, in plain words, put herself between him and the loudest man at the gate. Understood, ma'am, he said. I want to say a word about that instruction because it is the whole of my philosophy of command compressed into 2 sentences at a gate. Run him by the book, same as you'd run me. I did not tell Marsh to punish Prentice. I did not tell him to enjoy it, or to make a point of it, or to be anything other than correct. I told him to apply the same rule to the powerful man that he had already applied to me, which is the only definition of fairness that has ever meant anything. Fairness is not being nice to everyone. Fairness is the rule not caring who you are. A gate that opens for stars and closes for sweaters is not a lax gate, it is a corrupt one. And the distance between those 2 words is the distance a young sailor's whole sense of the institution can fall through if the wrong boss is standing there on the wrong night. I was not going to be the wrong boss. Not on the first night. The first night is the one they remember. A second set of headlights came up the road before Marsh had finished the first revet screen. It was a government sedan, plain and clean, and it slowed as it came level with the gatehouse, and the window came down, and Captain Roland Ames looked out at the small scene assembled at his gate. Ames was the outgoing commanding officer, the man whose flag came down tomorrow as mine went up, 52 years old, gray at the temples, with the tired graciousness of a man in the last day of a long command who has learned to be surprised by very little. He saw me first. His eyes went to me standing at the gatehouse in my civilian clothes on the wrong side of the barrier, and I watched him understand it in one motion, the way one commanding officer reads another. He did not call out a rank. He did not make a ceremony of it. He simply smiled, a real and rather weary smile, and said, Captain Calder, you're early. I'm early, sir. My apologies to your watch. They've handled it perfectly. Of course they have. He looked past me at the black sedan, and the weariness in his face deepened by a precise, knowing degree. Ah, he said, I see you've met half the problem already. Roland! Prentice's voice came from the sedan, changed now, reaching for the warmth of old acquaintance the way a man reaches for a railing. "Roland, thank God! Will you tell these people to open the gate? I have been sitting here for a quarter of an hour." Ames put his car in park. He got out, unhurried, and he came and stood with us at the gatehouse, on our side of the barrier, and by doing that he answered Prentice's question more completely than any words could have. Two commanding officers, the one going and the one coming, stood together on the correct side of a gate, and a retired admiral sat in a car on the other side of it and began, at last, to understand the shape of the evening. "Gerald," Ames said, not unkindly. "This is Captain Meredith Calder. She relieves me tomorrow morning. As of that ceremony, this is her installation." He let that sit for a moment. "And as of tonight, by the turnover instruction you have been read into more times than I have, contractor access under my sponsorship is suspended pending her authorization, which means your badge, my friend, is not going to open that gate this evening. Not for me, not for you. Roland!" Prentice tried a different key now, lower, the old friend key, the one that had opened so many doors. "Roland, come on, it's me, you know me, this is theater. And walk me through, we'll have a drink, and tomorrow your very capable relief here can sign whatever she needs to sign, and we forget the whole thing happened. You don't want your last night in command to be the night you left an old shipmate sitting at the gate." I watched Ames consider it. To his great credit, he did not consider it for long, and he did not pretend the temptation was not real. He was a good officer at the end of a good command, and the last thing any of us wants, on the last night, is a scene that becomes the story people tell. Prentice had aimed the pressure, with real skill, at exactly the place where a decent man is softest, his desire to leave cleanly. But Ames had spent 30 years learning the same lesson I had, and he knew, as I knew, that the whole worth of a rule is that it does not have a back door for friends. "Gerald," he said, and there was something almost gentle in it now, the gentleness you use on a man who is about to understand something. "If I walk you through that gate tonight, then the last thing I do in command of this base is teach my watch that the instruction is a suggestion. I'm not going to do that to them, and I'm not going to do it to her." He nodded at me. "She's got to hold this line for the next 2 years. I'm not going to hand her a base that already learned it bends." I watched Gerald Prentice receive this. I did not enjoy it, quite. But I did not look away from it either, because I thought I owed it to the moment to witness it honestly. His face went through several things in a short time. Disbelief, first, then the beginning of anger, the reflex of a man used to anger working. And then, underneath both, something older and sadder, the dawning of a much larger fact, which was that the world had rearranged itself around him at some point while he was not paying attention, and the stars on his lapel had quietly stopped opening doors, and he had not noticed until he found himself sitting outside a gate he had driven through for 15 years, being told no by a petty officer half his age. Marsh came out of the gatehouse. He walked to the sedan, and he was steady, and he was correct, and he was, I thought, magnificent in the small, unglamorous way that holds the whole Navy together. "Sir," Marsh said, "your credential won't clear tonight. Base policy on turnover. It's nothing personal, sir. If you'll pull into the turnaround, I'll walk you over to visitor processing, and we'll get you a temporary pass sorted so you can attend tomorrow." On the reader in his hand, I could see the little screen. The badge had flagged. Access suspended pending revet. The machine, indifferent to stars, had simply done what it was built to do. "This is absurd," Prentice said, but the fire had gone out of it. He was not talking to Marsh. He was talking to the evening again, to the general unfairness of a world that had, at last, presented him a bill. "Do you have any idea how much business my company does on this base?" "Yes, sir," Ames said. "I do. It's why the revet exists." He pulled into the turnaround. There was no more fight in it. I have seen men fight the machinery of a base long past the point of sense, and it is an ugly thing, and Prentice, to whatever small credit the evening allowed him, did not do that. He pulled his sedan into the turnaround loop, and his associate, the younger man named Lasky, got out and stood by the trunk with the miserable posture of a man watching his boss discover a limit, and Marsh walked them both over to visitor processing under the sodium lights, correct and courteous the entire way. The gate line that had heard a retired admiral call me honey now watched him escorted to the visitor office like anyone else who arrives without valid access. Nobody gloated. That is not how a professional watch behaves, and Duarte would not have permitted it if it were. But the line stood a little differently after. a little straighter, the way people do when they have just watched the rules turn out to be real. I stood with Duarte at the gatehouse and watched them go, the retired admiral and his unhappy associate walking under the sodium lights toward a small office where a board specialist would take their information and issue a temporary pass. The same office, the same specialist, the same forms as for a plumber or a caterer or a spouse who lost a decal. There is a great leveling in that office. Everyone who passes through it is, for the length of the transaction, exactly equal, which is to say a person whose access has to be verified rather than assumed. Prentice had not stood in a line like that in decades. I suspect it was the most instructive 10 minutes he had spent in years, though I doubt he would ever describe it that way. "He'll be revetted in the morning," Duarte said to me, quietly, as we watched Marsh walk the two men across the lot. "First thing, when the office opens, he'll have his pass for the ceremony, he'll sit in the good seats." She paused. "He just won't be sitting in them because he honked." "No," I said. "He'll be sitting in them because his paperwork is in order. Same as everyone." Duarte looked at me then with an expression I had not earned yet, and was grateful for anyway. It is a look senior enlisted give an officer when they are recalibrating in real time how much rope they are going to extend and how much they are going to have to watch. I had, without meaning to make a demonstration of it, made a demonstration of it. My first act on the installation, before I had even taken command, had been to refuse an exception for a powerful man and to protect a young sailor for enforcing a rule. Chiefs notice that. They file it. It is worth more than any speech I could give from a podium the next day. I thought, standing there, that Gerald Prentice was not a villain. It is tempting to make him one, and it would flatter the story, but it would not be true. He was a man who had been waved through so many gates for so many years that he had genuinely forgotten the gates had rules. Every door had opened for him for decades. Every lane had been his. The stars had become, in his mind, not a thing he had once earned, but a permanent property of his person, a weather he carried with him, and he had mistaken the long courtesy of a navy that respected its retired flag officers for a right that could never expire. It could expire. It had. That was the whole point of the evening, and it had nothing to do with him personally. The base remembering its own rules on an ordinary Tuesday with no one important watching was the entire content of the lesson, and the lesson was not for Prentice. It was for Marsh. It was for the line. It was, in a way, for me. Marsh came back across the lot. I met him halfway. "Petty Officer Marsh," I said. "What's your first name?" "Diego, ma'am." "Diego." I put out my hand and he took it, a little startled. "You did that exactly right. All of it, the card, the chief, the admiral, all of it. You didn't skip a line because he was loud, and you didn't get small because he was important. That's the whole job. Most people go a whole career without doing it as well as you just did on a Tuesday." "Thank you," he said. "Thank you, ma'am." And I saw that it had landed where I meant it to. Not as flattery, but as the thing a young person needs and rarely gets, which is to be told by the person whose opinion is supposed to matter that the hard right thing they did in the dark was seen. I have thought a great deal over the years about how much of the whole institution runs on that one transaction and how badly we tend to it. A young sailor does the correct, difficult, unglamorous thing at 2 a.m, and almost always no one notices, because the entire point of the correct thing is that it produces no drama, and drama is the only thing most people know how to notice. The ship does not run aground, so no one remembers the officer who caught the waypoint. The gate holds, so no one remembers the petty officer who held it. The whole edifice is kept standing by thousands of quiet, correct acts that leave no mark precisely because they worked, and the people who perform them go years, sometimes whole careers, without a single senior person stopping to say, "I saw that, and it mattered." It costs nothing to say. It takes 10 seconds. And it is very nearly the only pay, beyond the actual pay, that the good ones ever get for being good. I had 10 seconds, and I spent them on Diego Marsh, and I have never once regretted a 10 seconds spent that way. The visiting officers' quarters gave me a small, clean room with a desk and a window that looked out over a slice of the harbor, and I sat at the desk that night with the folded orders in front of me and did not feel the way you might expect. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that, because the story would be neater if I did, and the truth is that the satisfaction of the evening was a thin and quiet thing. Clean but not sweet, more like the feeling after you have set a broken bone than after you have won a prize. A thing that was out of place had been put back where it belonged. That was all. There is a settledness in that, but there is no glory in it, and anyone who tells you there is has never actually had to do it. I made myself a cup of the bad coffee from the machine in the corner, and I sat and I let the evening settle in me. Outside the window, the harbor lights lay across the black water in long, unbroken lines. Somewhere out there, a duty section was standing the mid-watch on a ship, and somewhere closer, a new watch had come on at the gate, and the whole quiet machine of the place ran on through the night the way it had run before I came, and would run after I left. And tomorrow, for a little while, I would be the person responsible for all of it. That is a strange thing to hold in your hands at a desk at 11 o'clock at night. It does not feel like power. It feels like weight. I thought about Gordon Petrie, which surprised me. I had not thought about Petrie in years. All thermostat, he had said, 17 years ago, in a passageway on a destroyer, deciding what I was before I had said a word. And here I was, all these years later, and the thermostat he had meant as an insult had turned out to be the most useful instrument I owned. It had kept me level in the gate lane when a man called me honey. It had kept me from making a scene, and it had kept me from making an exception. And those are the two failures that live on opposite sides of every hard moment, and the thing that walks the line between them is exactly the cool, quiet, steady regulation that Petrie could not respect because he did not have it. I did not need Petrie to see me. I had stopped needing that a long time ago, somewhere out at sea, on a night when the ship turned in deep water and only I knew how close it had come. What he never gave me, I had simply stopped requiring. That is not the same as forgiving him, and it is better than forgiving him because it does not depend on him at all. Being right is cheap. I have met a great many people who are right constantly, loudly, at everyone. Being right costs you nothing and impresses no one worth impressing. The expensive thing, the thing that had kept me at a desk with a knot in my stomach on the night before I took command, was being the one who holds the line when it would be so much easier and so much smoother to look away. Anyone can enforce a rule on a person with no power. The whole test is whether you will enforce it on a person with a great deal of it on your first night when a single wave of your hand would make the problem disappear and no one would ever have blamed you for it. There is a particular loneliness in it too, and I will not pretend there is not. When you hold a line that everyone around you would have quietly let go, you are, for a moment, alone with it. No one thanks you for the scene you prevented, because they never see the scene you prevented. Ames understood, and Duarte understood, and that was a gift, because they had held the same lines and knew what they cost. But most nights there is no Ames and no Duarte. Most nights it is just you and the easy exit and the knowledge that you could take it and no one would ever know. And the only thing standing between you and the easy exit is a private standard that pays you nothing and that you cannot even talk about without sounding like you are bragging. You just have to hold it because it is yours, in the dark, for free, and go to sleep and hold it again the next day. That is the actual job. The flag and the ceremony are the smallest, easiest, most visible, 1% of it. The other 99 is a woman at a desk at night, deciding again to be the standard instead of the exception, with no one watching and nothing but her own steadiness to answer to. I had held the line, it had cost me a smooth first night and an easy story, and it had bought me something I could not yet name, but recognize the shape of. Somewhere out on the installation, a 23-year-old petty officer named Diego Marsh was going off watch, knowing that the rules were real and that the person now in charge of him would stand between him and the loudest man at the gate. That was worth a knot in the stomach. That was worth a great deal. I set my alarm early. First full day tomorrow. First real one. The change of command was held at 10:00 hours, the next morning, on the lawn behind the headquarters building, under a sky scrubbed clean by the offshore wind. I wore my service dress blues, the dark coat and the ribbons and the gold on the sleeve, and I stood in the daylight in front of the assembled command and the guests in the folding chairs, and I did the thing properly, in the open, with the right words said in the right order. Captain Ames read himself out of command. I read myself in. The flag with my rank on it broke at the top of the pole, and the installation, in the formal language of the ceremony that has not changed in generations, passed from his hand to mine. I looked out at the assembled command while the orders were read, at the rows of sailors and civilians who worked the place I was now responsible for. And I found, near the back, standing a watch, even during the ceremony, because someone always has to, a couple of master-at-arms in their working uniforms. Marsh was not among them. He had come off the mid and was surely asleep, as he should have been. But I thought of him, and I made myself a small private promise, the kind you do not say out loud from a podium, that I would run this base the way he had run that gate. By the book. Same for everyone. No exceptions for the loud, no extra proof from the tired. If I could hold that line for 2 years, the way a 23-year-old had held it for 10 seconds on a Tuesday, I would have done the job. Gerald Prentice was there. He was revetted, as Duarte had said he would be. First thing when the security office opened, his paperwork put in order like anyone's, and he sat in the good seats near the front, a distinguished retired flag officer attending the change of command of a base his company did business with, which is exactly what he was and exactly where he belonged. I saw him during the ceremony. I did not perform anything at him. There was nothing to perform. Afterward, in the loose, social minutes when the formation has broken and the coffee comes out and the guests mill on the lawn, he came up to me. I confess I did not know what he would do. Men like Prentice are not always capable of the small grace a moment like that asks for, and I had prepared myself for anything from cold civility to a fresh complaint. He stopped in front of me and he looked at me for a moment, and something in his face had changed since the gate. Not humbled, exactly. Prentice was not a man who did humble, but recalibrated, a little rueful, a man who had been shown, at 71, a fact about the world he had managed to avoid for a long time. "Captain," he said. "Admiral," I said, and I gave him the honorific, because he had earned it once, and because grace costs nothing, and because I had never had any interest in taking from him the one true thing he still had. "Thank you for coming." "That was a good gait you're running," he said. It came out stiff. It was, I understood, as close as a man like him gets to an apology, and I decided to receive it as the full apology it was standing in for. "That young sailor last night, he did his job." "He did," I said. "It's the whole reason the gate works." He nodded. He looked as if he might say something else, and then decided against it, which was, I think, its own kind of wisdom. He gave me a short nod, an even one, the nod of one professional to another, and he moved off into the crowd, and that was the end of it. I did not need Gerald Prentice to salute me. I want to be clear about that, because I think it is the center of the whole thing. I did not need him to bow, or to grovel, or to be humiliated on the lawn for the pleasure of the people who had heard him call me honey. What I needed was much smaller and much larger than that. I needed the gate to work. I needed it to work for me in a gray sweater, and for him in a blazer, and for the next tired person in a rental car who gets called honey by the next loud man in a sedan. The standard is for everyone, or it is for no one. That is not a slogan. It is the load-bearing wall of the whole institution, and my job, starting that morning, was to hold it up. That evening at dusk I walked the line at the gate again. This time I was in my own uniform, and the watch knew exactly who I was, and there was no mistaking me for anyone lost. Marsh was not on that watch, but the sailor who was checked my card anyway, the same careful way, gold on my sleeve and all, and I was glad of it. The gate held. It held for me the same as it had held against me, which is the only way a gate is worth anything at all. I want to say something now to you, whoever you are, if you have ever been the tired person in the gray sweater. If you have ever been waved off, talked down to, told to run along, mistaken for less than you are by someone who decided what you were before you had said a single word, then you already know the particular sting of it, and you already know the 2 wrong answers that rise up to meet it. One is to make a scene, to prove them wrong loudly, to spend all your energy demanding the recognition they withheld. The other is to make yourself small, to swallow it, to wave the loud ones through, because it is easier than holding the line. Both of those are the thermostat set wrong. One runs too hot and one runs too cold. The thing that actually works is quieter than either, and harder. Do your job so well and so steadily that the truth of you arrives without your help on its own schedule, carried by the plain machinery of the world. You do not have to announce who you are. Let the scanner do it. Let the work do it. Let the rules, applied honestly to everyone, including the people with stars on their bumpers, do it. The people who matter will see it, and the people who do not will not, and neither of those outcomes is your job to manage. And if the day ever comes when it is your gate, when you are the one holding the line, then hold it open for everyone and hold it closed for everyone the same. Do not make exceptions for the loud. Do not make the tired ones prove themselves twice. Stand between your people and the ones who honk. That is the whole of it. That is the standard, and the standard is the only thing any of us ever really command. You do not owe anyone a scene. You owe the work your best, and you owe the next tired person a gate that holds. Do that, and you will not need the salute. You will have done the thing the salute was only ever meant to stand for. Hold the line. And thank you for standing your watch with me.